Choosing the right suspension for your classic car can be an intimidating process. There are a lot of different choices, considerations, and questions to ask to do this. Now, in order to do that, we've compiled a variety of vintage technology and modern day solutions. So whether you're restoring a car, looking to upgrade your current classic, or just want to find out what kind of advantages, advancements, and how far technology has come in the last 50+ years, this video is going to help you make an informed decision, give you all the information you need. My name is Trooper Max, and I'm restoring a car that's been off the road since 1977. But I've never done this before. I've taken the time to do my research, and I'm building the car of my dreams, hoping to inspire others to do the same. So this is our 72 Nova. We've been working on it for the past year and a half. We've put over 800 hours into this thing, just trying to get back on the road and getting the best quality possible. Now, when it comes to cars, I think one of the most difficult and confusing subjects is suspension. You know, I did my research on this thing even before starting. Despite doing all the research, asking questions, and making a plan that would make sense for this car, I still ended up having to do something completely different from what I originally had planned. So what we're installing on this eventually and what I'd planned are two completely different things. And what I want to do is I just wanted to show people what kind of questions you should ask yourself, what to look out for when you're doing your own project, or you're just looking to find out information or want to upgrade your car. There's so much to know. I really wish I had the answer to these questions before I started. So that's what I want to do. So let's get into it. All right, so taking a look around, there's a lot going on here. We got some modern suspension, we got old school, we have a rear end, we have a Ford 9-inch, we have a Chevy 8.5, we got some tubular suspension, and we even have the original control arm still on there. And even with that, you don't just have to pick one system. You can mix and match things. You can have some classic parts, some new parts. You can mix things together. There's so many different things to do. Once we know the answers to the questions we have, we can make a good plan, which is what I wish I did in the first place. So let's really get into it now. All right, so looking down here, let's try to make sense of everything. We got some rear ends, and you're probably wondering, you know, what the hell are they doing here? What does that got to do with suspension? Well, it's a whole system and how it works together. So it is relevant. We'll get into the details. But what we have here is a Chevy 8.5 rear end. This is a 10-bolt, which is original off the car. And then here we have a Ford 9-inch. And at the same time, we have the original leaf springs, we have the shock relocation kit, that's an aftermarket part, and on this side, we have all the components we need for a 4-link system that will go with this. And at the same time, we got some new axles. All right, so there's a lot of stuff to choose from. In fact, there's even more options that I don't have available here that I'm gonna talk about. But before we get into the details, what we gotta do is we gotta ask the questions to figure out exactly what we need for a car. So what I've done is actually broke it down to 5 categories, and within these categories are questions, and if you answer these questions, it's going to become very apparent and simple to figure out exactly what you need for your car. So the first thing is, what are we working with? What items do we have? The second thing is, what's the condition of the car? The third thing is, what's the usage of the car? The fourth is, what do you want the look of the car to be? And the last one is budget and time, and they're together. So the first category, what are we working with? That basically means what's on the car, what do you have available in the garage, what can you save and repurpose? If you could save some money, make it work on the car, that can make sense. But you gotta make sure your plan will work with what you have available. The second thing to consider is the condition of the car. Is your car being restored or is it complete? Because that may determine how we do things. The third thing is the usage, which is the most important thing. What are you using it for? Are you daily driving it? Like, is this thing gonna be driven thousands of miles? Or is it just gonna be a cruiser around, you know, a couple 100 miles a year? Or the third thing, is it gonna be for drag racing? Because those are 3 massive categories you have to consider. The last one's everyone's favorite, is budget and time. So how much money are you willing to spend on it? How much time do you want to put into it? If you want to spend more money, it could take more time. If you want to do it cheap and easy, that's also an option, something to consider. All right, so looking around here, pretty simple for me. I got the leaf springs and I got the 8.5 rear end, and now I'm gonna get into what our plan was and why it failed and we had to change it. So the plan on this car was pretty simple. I wanted to restore it and have it as a daily driver. So I wanted to drive it for 3 seasons of the year, not driving in the winter time, so anything but snow and salt. So we're talking sun, rain, sand, mud. I don't really care. I'm cool with it as long as there's no snow or salt. Now, because the thing's in the restoration phase, the world's your oyster. You can do anything you want. So we have a lot of flexibility. We're not kind of married to any decisions because it's not painted or anything like that. So for the look of the car, I didn't actually want to slam this thing to the ground, which is very popular nowadays. I actually wanted to make this a 70s Street Machine tribute car. And what that means is make it look like it's out of the 70s. So we're talking bigger tires in the back, smaller tires in the front, a slight rake, so the ass end is raised up a little bit while the front's a little bit down. Now, nothing super extreme. We're not talking like 4 inches, just very slightly. All right, so now that we answered all the important questions, we can start looking at what we got available and what matches our car. All right, old school guys looking to keep their car factory. All you could really do is just replace parts with new parts. This means replacing your leaf springs. You can replace your struts because the struts have come a long way. They're much better technology than back in the day. And at the same time, a lot of that old stuff is so worn down. If you just refresh it all, the drive quality is gonna be much better. And at the same time, you can change rubber bushings to polyurethane bushings. Just that alone, I've been in a lot of cars that had that basic switch. They drive pretty well. So basically that's the best ride quality you can get with something that looks 100% stock factory. Now, if you want to keep it factory, it's pretty much the same thing on the front. All you could really do is change the struts. You're not modifying everything. Here, everything's factory, nothing's been changed. So if I want to make it look 100% factory, all I can do is change the struts. Now, if you want to have a little more fun, this could be a little more complicated because you're going to get axle hop, depending on what car you have. It's not going to have very good conditions for doing things like burnouts or having fun, so you might have to do some changes. Now, if you want to do some changes, the first thing is just to add traction bars. A lot of people do that. And what also works well with that is this. So this is a shock relocation kit. Now, Chevy in particular staggered their shocks. They wanted to reduce axle hop by doing that. It didn't work very well. But if you do a shock relocation kit, along with some traction bars, you can actually get really good performance, believe it or not. So I've seen a lot of people have this. Now, if you got a little more speed, you might want to upgrade to disc brakes. So with the shocks like that, they can actually get in the way. So you need something like this. So this is why I bought this. My original plan was to relocate my shocks so I can get disc brakes in, which is why I bought this thing. So I have it here. And that's this very simple setup that should work. So now let's talk about usage, performance, and utility. So if you're looking to just drive around town, a couple 100 miles a year, a basic leaf spring setup is fine. You don't need anything better than that. And at the same time, if your budget is low, then that's fine too, because that's the lowest option. However, if you're daily driving this thing, you're putting a lot of miles on it, or you have a lot of performance on it, you put a lot of power under the hood, you might want to do something like a 4-link. So you often hear the saying, oh, it drives like a new car. You can't really get that out of the leaf springs because there's such a massive difference. In the 50 years or plus that has gone by, technology has changed so much. So a lot of people are choosing 4-link systems. This particular one's from QA1. Now, regardless whatever company you go with, it's gonna be far superior than just using leaf springs. What it does, it really protects your investment. You gotta think, if you're putting a lot of power under the hood, or if you're driving very often, you gotta do some sort of aggressive action, or if you just have a loved one driving the car and you wanna keep them safe, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. You just wanna give yourself as many chances possible to protect your loved ones, and protect your investments. So if you're looking for that, it's worth spending money. It will be more time, it will be more money, but I think it's worth it in the end if that's what you're looking for. Now, for the front, rather than keeping this, you can always do something like tubular control arms. So these would be changed. This is modern technology, basically. There's just better geometry. You'll get better performance, keeping the car straighter on the road. You're not getting that wobbliness as much. It's just better performance. And at the same time, if something goes wrong, you really want to give yourself as many chances you can to avoid an accident or whatever. So that's a good idea. It's just better technology. But probably the coolest thing about a modern 4-link system is these guys right here. These are known as coilovers. These are not basic struts. Even though struts have come a long way, once you put your strut on, it's not adjustable. You can't change the height. Whereas these guys, you can actually change your ride height. On top of that, it's got 2 knobs here, and you can adjust the firmness. So what's really cool about this is if you're just driving down the road many miles, you can put the softest setting on, and then you decide, you know what, I want to go drag racing. You can put the firmest and you'll get the best quality possible for driving. They even provide different numbers of what settings to put in different conditions, so it's fully adjustable, so that's pretty neat. What about the third scenario, drag racing? Well, that's probably the hardest one to answer because there's so many different products and setups out there, so many things. It's so personal to the person. However, I'm just gonna do a really basic one I've seen people use. I've seen a lot of people use the CalTrack system by Calvert. It's a split leaf monoleaf, and what that basically means, one part of the leaf sits on the other, and it just gets rid of all that waviness. The car plants much better, you get rid of the axle hop. And then I've actually seen people use the dual adjustable struts. you can match it with that, and that system is very adjustable. There's a lot of flexibility, and it's fairly inexpensive for what it is. So it just goes to show you, you can mix and match technology. Of course, if you go with like a full 4-link system, you don't have to worry because you can do pretty much anything you want. But if that's out of your price range, you can go with something much more simple. Okay, so that covers some of those basic scenarios. But we're just getting started. We're just scratching the surface here. It can get so much more complicated and detailed, and oh my God. All right, now here comes the fun part. We're gonna talk about our situation, what our original plan was, and why there's rear ends lying around here, and why our plan failed. So originally I thought I was really lucky because I had this 8.5 rear end. So this thing can actually be converted if you change the axles. The axles are 28 spline from the factory, and you can actually change them to 31 spline. And what that means is it makes this thing as strong as a 12 bolt. Essentially, in layman's terms, you can put a lot of power on this thing and not blow it up. Now, mind you, I don't know what the limit is on this thing, but I know with that setup, it should be pretty freaking strong. At the same time, I had these lift springs, and I was like, all right, well, let's save the leaf springs, put some shackles on, we'll do the shock relocation, you know, it'll be great. The car will look high up, it'll have new suspension basically with the new struts. All right, so next I thought to myself, well, I'll take the leaf springs out, re-arch them and repurpose them. Well, when we started taking these things off, they just started falling apart. They were so brittle from all those years, they can't be reused. So now we need new leaf springs, we need new axles. I had to buy the shock relocation kit. We still need to buy the shocks themselves, so this is not so cheap anymore. Basically, we need a whole new suspension. But even if we did that, we have a much bigger problem. So we were talking about earlier the usage and what I plan to do with it, and if you're paying attention, you might realize that our plan and what we have available is not gonna work together. So I was pretty dead set on the system. I had made this plan about 2 years ago, and I had been in a lot of factory original cars, so I knew exactly how the muscle cars drive. Until about a couple months back, a buddy of mine decided to let me drive his 68 Chevelle. So we were doing a video on his 68 Chevelle, and he wanted to do a sweeping 90 at about 60 miles an hour. Now, I've done a lot of those kind of turns before, and you're just holding on for dear life. And he did this thing, and he had coilovers on. That was the difference with this car. This Chevelle had QA1 coilovers, which is how I heard about this company in the first place. So he went through this thing, and the car was just totally stable. It just made me think differently, that maybe the old school technology isn't for me. And at this point, in the car, I'm a year and a half in. I've done over 800 hours in the car. I've put so much work into it. And just putting in something so basic might not make sense anymore. If I want to use it every day, after driving a car that had modern suspension, I was really blown away by the quality, you know? So up until that point, I was totally against the 4-link. I was like, they're too expensive, too much money. I don't want to do it. I'll just do the front because the front is good enough. But after doing that drive, I realized that, you know, it really might be worth it. So at this point, I was like grudgingly more open-minded to a 4-link. I was like, all right, well, I was, really dead set on my technology and decisions here, but after that drive, it just made a lot of sense. So I looked into it, and with someone like QA1, there's a hybrid system. Basically, you could put the coilovers on, the 4-link goes on with U-bolts and welding and whatnot, and you can use your rear end. And I was like, all right, well, that's pretty cool. That's a good option. And then we end up going to SEMA and ended up learning about this thing. So we're building this car, and we have absolutely nothing for it. As you can see, it's absolutely bare. I have no parts for it, and my idea was to put modern technology in this car. So I figured, what better place to see modern technology than SEMA? So we were able to go there, look at all, the most modern brake systems and steering and suspension and everything. So we looked into it. So when we were down there, we looked at suspension, and we looked at a bunch of 4-link systems. So we looked at companies like RideTech, and we looked at QA1. So they were both very impressive, but with QA1 we were talking, and I mentioned to the sales guy our plan, I want to use my 8.5 rear end and all this stuff. And he's talking to me, he's like, well, you know what, that's cool, but you should really consider the new X-body Ford 9-inch we have. And he's showing me this thing, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, here we go. Like, what do I need this for? I don't care about the rear end. I already have one. I'm happy with it. And then he started kind of mentioning everything about it. So what's cool about this thing is this already has all the bracketry you need in order to mount everything. If you're doing a 4-link, there's a lot of different modifications you have to do with this. If you look at it, it doesn't have all the brackets and pieces to put it on. Whereas this one, it's already ready to go. It's got everything you need. Basically, there's no room for error. For a guy like me that's never done this before, this is really the safer option. This has to be welded in, as you can see. There's a reason why there's no powder coat on the end. But there's instructions how to put it in, and that's pretty much all the welding there is. So they've really dumbed it down for people that are, you know, kind of DIYs. But what's really cool about it is the fact that it comes with its own axles. So this thing comes with axles. The axles are rated for 650 horsepower. I need to get new axles. This one has 31 spline axles. And at the same time, the housing itself is rated for 800 horsepower. I don't know what the 10 bolt is rated for. I'm sure it's strong, but I'm not 100% sure on it. Whereas this one, I know the numbers. So we got 800 there, we got 650 here. And at the same time, even if the car was, let's say 700 horsepower, I'm not pushing those kind of numbers on a daily basis. It'd be very occasional. And then at the same time, the cool thing about the 4 and 9 inch is if you want to change your gearing, it's a completely different way of doing it than the Chevy. So much harder on the Chevy. This is way easier to work with. Now, when I was taking apart this rear end, I had discovered that it only had a 308 gear and no posi traction open differential. Not very desirable at all. If this thing was a 12 bolt with big axles, a good gear ratio and a posi, I would absolutely keep it. So all of a sudden now I'm thinking to myself, okay, look at this system. We have the 4 9 inch. We know it's rated for the strength we need. We're going to be pairing it with a Tremec 6-speed. So I know that transmission with this rear end won't blow up. Once this car is built, I don't want to touch it unless, you know, for some reason I do blow it up. But if I'm putting in a good transmission, I'm putting in a lot of power, I want a good rear end. So I don't really want to risk it. I know those axles are rated for a good amount of power. If I have to change them, I will. But I need new axles anyways. So at this point, I'm just thinking, this makes sense. It makes sense for me. It might not make sense for everybody because everybody's got different needs. But to me, this is a solution for anybody that's doing something themselves or they want something with a little more power, a little more performance. I know it's going to bolt on properly and everything. It just, in my scenario, it just made the most sense. Now, all that said, there are other options and solutions out there. The kit I'm installing, you can actually get it with a narrowed rear end. So if you want a mini tub, you want to put some really big wheels on there, kind of go for like a pro touring or pro street look, you can do that. They have that option. And the fact is, I'm only getting the dual adjustable shocks, so there's 3 different levels. There is a 3rd level, and that one's for drag racing and pro touring and really serious racing, so there is a step above. For us, it's just not necessary in this case. Now, there are other very impressive 4-link systems out there. You know, I looked at companies like RideTech. However, companies like RideTech, I didn't see the flexibility with the ride height. They didn't have the ability to go over stock, or in some cases, they were actually lower. So it's more for a kit for people who are slamming it down to the ground. For our case, or anybody doing like a stock look, I just thought QA1 had more flexibility. So for us, it just worked better. And at the same time, their cross member is actually bolted on, which in some cases might be good for people that are worried about finished paint. However, I really like the weld-on idea much better just because when I know it's in there, it's going to be in there forever. And that just seems a lot more permanent to me. So there we go. That's what we're going to be going with, but there's lots of choices out there. You can pick what works for you. Like I said, there's not one solution for everyone. There's so many different variations and variables to consider. But I think the most important thing is to know what you need for your car. And another thing I think to consider is if you're putting a lot of time and effort into something like this, you know, consider putting in better parts. I'm not saying you got to go top of the line, best for everything, but I've always been of the mindset that if you're doing the work yourself, you might as well buy good materials because that way you'll be happy with them. So I think that's a good way to think. So I think with all that said, I think next thing to do is actually start installing this thing. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next episode. We're going to be putting in the rear end. We're not putting the front right now because we're still going to be working on the subframe in the front and restoring that and whatnot. But for now, we do want to do the rear because there's some welding to do. I want to make sure all our welding is done before we paint this thing.